Well, we don't disrespect our founding fathers at all. When I say we, I mean people who don't like the government, but like America. Okay, when we say founding fathers, we're usually referring to George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, all these guys, right? And there's a lot of them. There's even people who don't really get as much credit, like Thomas Paine, John Locke, people even from Britain and all these people from the British colonies. I mean, they were actually, some of them were promoting these ideas, and it ultimately seeped in to the American system that came overseas, supposedly, right? This was 300 years ago, and we didn't even end slavery until 100 years after. That's not even 200 years from now, from when I'm doing this recording right now. So that's crazy. I mean, we just ended slavery 200 years ago. And honestly, that's a blink of a moment. Because just think about how fast time flies. You ever say, well, gosh, where did the time go? And then you question, well, gosh, well, why does history keep repeating itself? It's because things are actually happening much faster than you think. Things happen so quickly, and humans have not been on Earth that long, really. We're new to this place. We're new to this knowledge, and we're still learning. I mean, to think that our founding fathers in America, with their Declaration of Independence, saying the laws of nature, saying that we are equal, we have equal rights, and no civilization prior has even thought of these ideas. Maybe they were making similar appeals to try to get people on their side, to create new forms of government, to keep people under control, but none really recognized and said, well, hey, you can have your own self-defense against your own government. And to say, well, what if you do have natural rights and those need to be respected? What if we can limit the government? The thing is, however, is that they're still human beings. They're not perfect. We can't expect them to be perfect, just as we're not perfect. But we live in the modern age of information. We have information that goes crazy all the way throughout the internet, all throughout the world. Endless, timeless, as long as it's always there, and it is so far for the most part. Now, is it always going to be? Well, I don't know. Not everything lasts forever. We'll see, right? But technology is this new thing that we've only had for what? 20 years, basically, just in its crazy advancement of, well, we got flying machines and cars that can have all these fancy equipments, and, you know, we got touch screens, all this stuff. This is all new, guys. This is all new. The human species has so much to still learn. And for anyone to say, well, science has figured it all out, religion, all this stuff, let me tell you, science is trying to replace religion. It's saying religion is old. But let me tell you, it's all new. It's still all new. Okay? And religion held a lot of the sciences back then. Science is becoming a religion for people who only want to receive their information through scientific means, and say, well, science is going to determine my belief set, and I'm not going to use my own nature to understand my world and use philosophy. I'm going to use science, right? And then there's people who are in philosophy who only study things according to the views of other people and say, well, this was this person's view and this was this person's view. Let's evaluate all their views. And not really thinking for themselves. I'm not asking you to think of the founding fathers in one way or another way, to say they're the best humans on earth or to say they're the worst. I don't care where you stand on that, but what we do have to say is that we can dedicate to them the fundamentals of them recognizing those fundamentals of nature, right? Those fundamentals are the fact that we have natural rights, or that we have natural law, or even just getting even deeper beyond that, even if you disagree with those terminologies, is understanding that we're free, that we deserve freedom, that it is our destiny to be free, that everybody deserves freedom, that we have our own property, that property should not be stolen from other people, and that humans are not to be the property of other people because we're equal in rights. Right? By nature, because nobody's born out of the womb as a slave. That doesn't happen. That happens over imposition, somebody imposing their will on somebody else. So that is government. That's the difference between America and government. I could be born on the land and have nothing to do with the government, but then the government steps in and say, well, hey, sorry, you got to make sure you have a birth certificate with that, and make sure you register for our system, and by when you're 18, you have to make sure to do this. Oh, and make sure that you fill out all your taxes when you get payment. This is where the government steps in and says, I'm going to take over your life. You're no longer an American. You're under the United States of America, Inc., Incorporated, our corporation, which is a corporation on violence. As even Elon Musk has said himself, government is a monopoly on force, which is violence, right? You can differentiate force versus violence and the need for self-defense, but violence, essentially understanding that violence is violating another person's rights. It is harming somebody or taking the property of another or doing something involuntarily, right? This is something that is wrong. It is something that is not good, because if you ask anyone, well, is violence okay? No. Okay, well then why do we allow it when certain people who call themselves government are allowed to commit violence for the, quote, greater good, or because some politician wrote it on this piece of scribbles? Since when? Since when did our founding fathers specify about all this? Did they know about all this? Did they allow a system for all of this? Well, they did. And a lot of them were opposed to their own creations. And a lot of them wrote about how it could become tyrannical. How if we did this, if we did that. Because they knew it could be possible. Well, if it would be possible, then, well, it's inevitably going to get there. If there's been civilizations with hundreds of years down the road, like the Roman Empire or Samaria, thousands of years, and America has only been alive for 300 years, and people think it's been striving and thriving. No, it isn't. It's still new. And the Founding Fathers were just some people who talked about natural rights when there were many others. Many others. I go over in my History of Natural Law video. Check that out. But their ideas, they had to originate from somewhere else, and ultimately they still believed that they needed somebody to be in charge of their property, to say, well, we need some centralized force, we need somebody who we can say is the authority to rule over everybody else in case, something goes wrong, like another country invades us, right? But really, did they need that when it came to rebelling against the British? No, they took up their own arms. They had to kill their own soldiers of their own crown, create their own flag, and their own movement to essentially do that. It was their ever-persisting belief in statism which said, well, we need to create a new system after that. And every time we create a new system, it always fails because it never works. And anybody who denies that and thinks that, well, it could work in this condition, who says you are the one to determine what it should be? Why would you be perfect to think it should work a certain way and that is the best way of all? And you may say, well, we got to learn what is the best way. Are we ever? And maybe you say, well, because it's so new, we have to learn. We have a lot more years to learn. How many years left before there's nukes flying through the sky? And honestly, why can't we look at it through the lens of understanding what that belief in authority is to begin with? Do you know what that is? It's called statism. You may have never heard about this before if you're somebody who's an American constitutional patriot who reads the Constitution and makes sure everything is perfect under it, get the perfect limited government, even though there were many Federalists and Anti-Federalists at the time who were all protesting the Constitution. And not only that, but to end slavery, a lot of people were against the Constitution because they saw it legitimizing slavery, but we're going to ignore all that, of course, and we're going to ignore the fact the Constitution allows taxation, which is basically theft, because you did not consent to your money being taken, and it's backed by the threat of violence, because again, government is a monopoly on violence, but most people want to ignore that because they don't look at statism, they don't look at morality, even though the Founding Fathers were saying, hey, morality is what's important. That's why we're freeing ourselves, because we recognize we're supposed to be free. That's a moral cause. So they educated each other about it. They put it in documents. But the problem is when they said, well, we need to enforce this, it's like, how are you supposed to enforce freedom of speech? Of course you can't. That's why it's not working in today's world, because you can't enforce freedom of speech. If you try, you're just going to end up with, well, the opposite. People saying, well, you can't do this, you can't do that with your life, because that's exactly what government is created for. If you want freedom of speech, you have to be free. If you want to have self-defense, You need to be free for self-defense. Otherwise, those aren't options. And these are human necessities, are they not? If an animal gets attacked in the wild, are they just going to sit back and say, okay, go ahead, kill me? No, they're going to self-defend themselves because they see it necessary to protect their own property, which they own. And if you say, well, they're not allowed to defend their own property, then is it really their own property, or are they a slave? And that's the connection I make in my latest book, Slavery Gone for Good, Modern Abolitionism. I go over how government is slavery, and I even redid all the American founding fathers' documents. So if you don't believe me, and you think, well, okay, they were wrong, well, how so? Well, I will show you through their own documents and revising it in a universal, timeless fashion, because their stuff was not, always. Some parts were, which is why a lot of people are appealed to it, but it's not all the way there. It's not understanding statism. It's not fully recognizing and embracing morality, or at least it went off course, because the Declaration of Independence is fully fine. There's nothing in there that says, well, we get to decide who to put in charge, and majority rule gets to decide, their will gets to be imposed upon everybody else, and everybody else must obey by threat of violence, and we must have a tax system. No, the Declaration of Independence says, we lived under tyranny, we want to be free. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a human cause. But when we create a constitution and say this is what forms a new government, we're saying the government of God, the natural law, does not matter anymore. We're saying that man's law matters. We're saying that man's government matters, and that all that other stuff, yeah, it matters too, but we're just going to put this on top of it. Like, how could you do that? You can say, well, okay, well, God designed it so that humans can have their own governments. Really? Well, how has that worked for about 6,000 years? All I see is a track record of governments falling and rising and falling and rising, with millions of deaths annually in the number one cause of unnatural death, which is democide. The number one cause. So you have statism, which is a very dangerous belief system that contributes to democide. And if you don't know either one of these, then how much are you really standing for the things that the Founding Fathers were just basically on the brink of? Because how would you expect these people who came from this super tyrannical England monarchy, right, to just know all the basics of freedom, freeing themselves from that crown? Like, they know some pretty darn important things, but you don't think their mind's going to get twisted from having to kill their fellow men in order to free themselves? They had to kill their own soldiers of their own government in order to free themselves. I mean, how much dedication, how much ruthlessness does that take? How much strength does it take to say, I'm going to create a revolution, I'm going to take other people with me? I mean, gosh, how many people are willing to do that today? I mean, just that mindset alone is just not there in the populace. Right? But regardless of that, then looking at the philosophical foundation as to what they did, and they adopted based on a lot of different things, like I said, and other people's works, well, how could we say that they knew everything too? They weren't in the mass age of information. They didn't live through World War II. They didn't see that America would turn into the place it is now. They didn't see the rapid rise of technology. Right? They didn't deal with people like Karl Marx and all these new philosophers that came out of the woodworks and saying, well, everything is wrong. Right? They didn't deal with any of that. So the people who promote those ideologies are going to say the Founding Fathers are old, they didn't know what they're talking about. And I would agree with them in the sense that, well, we need to learn from the past, but how could we say they're wrong? They did something for a reason. We need to learn for that reason. But then we also need to understand, well, why are we in the situation we are now in, and can we move forward and evolve even further, continue the work that they did that was right, and move on with that information for what we know to be right. And we can start by doing what we know to be right, which is not... Well, ask yourself, what is right to do to another human being? Well, don't commit violence, don't impose your will. What are we doing in today's world? Imposing our will on others, committing violence so other people comply. Well, if we're allowing that, then how could anything else we say be legitimate? If we have such great ideas, why do we have to back it by the threat of violence? Is it because people are not going to listen to our ideas? Then obviously those ideas aren't very great, right? And then what's the point of natural law? Is that not serve any function in society, basically? It's all just man's law because that's what determines the consequences to behavior? See, these are the questions to ask yourself, and then I'll put on 5 more questions on the screen so you can ask yourself even more about this. These are the questions that really started getting me asking more than what the Founding Fathers simply provided to us. Okay, because let's be honest, like I said, there's more that we need to look at. We're an advanced human species. We have to advance. Okay, we're always advancing. And, you may say, well, the way they wrote back then, we admire it. We may say that they were very smart in the way they did things, like writing about all these topics that people don't want to talk about today and admitting that, well, the Founding Fathers were right in many ways. Well, what about the abolitionists in the 1800s who freed the slaves? Were they not right for doing that? What caused them to do that? That's why I wrote a whole book about it. Okay, and do you not think they were patriotic being in America? Well, it would surprise you. They didn't participate in the political system, and they denied a lot of the American Founding Fathers documents because they saw it necessary for the moral cause of humanity. So they had the same cause of the Founding Fathers, which was morality, which was freedom, but they didn't follow the Founding Fathers exactly. They realized that there needed to be some new change in the world. And I'm saying that's the exact same thing we need to do today. Otherwise, we will keep moving in the wrong direction, and we'll become even more alienated from who we are until a new system grows out of this and it just becomes even more tyrannical than it was before. Because that's what always happens. It's become to be that the nations that always proclaim to be for freedom actually become the most dangerous because everybody thinks that they're free when they're not. They're being more deceived. It's more deceiving to think that you're in charge instead of some few people where it's clear who is in charge, where it's clear this is the king and queen, they rule you, they own your stuff. It's not so clear under a democracy. And books like The End of All Evil by Jeremy Locke also put this in great perspective in such easy terminology. If you haven't read that book, would recommend it to you. I'm not an unreasonable person. Does it look like I'm an unreasonable person? Am I sounding unreasonable to you? Right? Just use your human reason with me. Regardless of even the words I'm saying, think about what I'm conveying here. I'm talking about freedom and essential aspects of ownership, knowing what that is. Does that require learning from the Founding Fathers? No. Could they help us learn more about it? Sure. Right? But is it limited to just them and their philosophies? Where do they get their philosophies from? I'm sure it came from others as well, but they also added their own flair to things, and they saw, well, things might go wrong here or there, so they admitted to their own problems. They admitted that things are not always perfect. They can't be. They're human beings. So why do we ever have a human system rule over other human beings? And if we have government because people are not perfect, well, why have government if people are not perfect? Because then who gets to decide for everybody else what the rules are if everyone's imperfect? See, here's the deal. We have to embrace as a humanity our uniqueness, our freedom. Otherwise, we're not free. If we say everybody be this way, that way, then we're conformed. We're slaves. We're not really free. We have to embrace the fact that we have differences among ourselves, okay? We're not super sensitive and saying you have to think like me, you have to do this or that. I'm not imposing my will on you because I'm not using violence. I'm sharing knowledge with you. There's a difference. A lot of people will say, oh, well, what if I disagree with you? I'm not asking for you to agree with me. I'm asking for you to look into what I'm saying as a human being, just to care for what I'm saying and to consider it with your own heart, your own conscience, and make your own mind based on that. Because if it's truthful, if it's natural to understand, such as the fact that you're free and not a slave, then that is something that you should be able to understand. It doesn't require me. You don't require me to be free for yourself. Okay, you require yourself. Only you can free yourself. Okay, so I recognize that I can't even help you, even if I wanted to. Okay, so this is a job for us to do, just as much as you would teach a kid about their own morals, for them to do the right thing in life. I'm not saying that you're a kid and I have to teach you like a kid. Okay, we're all here in the same boat. We're all struggling. We're all learning. It's all about me as a human being. You're like, yo, listen, you gotta check this out. And I hope you do, okay? There is no perfect, there is no limited government. I have a whole video talking about why it's impossible, okay, and why it will never work. You can't use political action to change the system. I have a whole video talking about why you can't do that, why it'll never work, okay? I've talked about how pretty much every species, every race, every culture on Earth has committed genocide. But you have to ask yourself, and every civilization practiced slavery before the 1800s, okay? Every single one. Some of them still do today, okay? But the question is, how does it become aggregated? How do you take a wrongdoing and make it so that it's committed and condoned on a mass? How does that happen? Well, if it's systemic, there needs to be some sort of system in place that makes it so. Unless you're saying to me that slavery is a natural thing, that violence is a natural thing, that is going to be in mass amounts naturally. No, I actually disagree. It's not going to be in mass amounts naturally, because that happens when mass amounts of people allow it to grow into mass amounts of violence. Otherwise, if I talk to the average person, just as I would ask you, they would agree that violence is wrong, so they wouldn't let it happen. But you put a special badge, uniform, say they're a politician, put it in law on a fancy piece of paper, and then it changes. Like you can change morality? I don't think so. So, the Founding Fathers recognized natural rights. I respect them. I don't have a disregard for them. I think everyone in humanity has a purpose. We all do things for a reason. We all need to understand. Every perspective is there for a reason. We all need to understand that. And it's all about time and place, location essentially. So that way we know what to do in certain scenarios. And in the case of government, we really have to ask ourselves, well, do we own ourselves, and how much so are we expressing it? How much so are we allowing it? And so I encourage you to check out my book, Slavery Gone for Good, or The End of All Evil by Jeremy Locke, or The Most Dangerous Superstition by Larkin Rose, or any other resources I may have on nita.one/advanced. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Corey Mengelat. Nature is the answer. Americanism, freedom, yes, always, but that doesn't mean the government.